It was a crisp autumn morning when a lone truck, winding down a narrow dirt road through the dense woods, came to an unexpected stop. The driver, a wildlife photographer named Emily, had been traveling for hours, eager to capture the beauty of nature at its peak. But what she saw just beyond the tree line made her heart race. A pack of bears, each massive and intimidating, gathered around her truck. They weren't growling or charging, but something about their presence seemed off. They moved with a strange purpose, their eyes focused, almost as if they were waiting for something. Emily's mind raced. These were not just any bears. They were a family, a group of black bears whose territory she had ventured into. But as a seasoned photographer, she knew to remain calm and assess the situation from the safety of her vehicle. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. She watched, her heart pounding, as the bears slowly closed in around her truck. There was no immediate threat, but Emily could sense the vulnerability in their movement. These were not the aggressive creatures of nightmares. Instead, there was something else, an unsettling quiet that hinted at distress, a longing in their eyes that made her feel a deep sympathy. As the minutes passed, Emily couldn't help but wonder, why were these bears here? What were they waiting for? And what were they hoping to find? The silence was broken when one bear, a large female, stepped forward, her steps slow but deliberate. Her eyes locked onto Emily's with an intensity that left the photographer breathless. Emily could see it now. There was a reason the bears had surrounded her truck, a reason that, once discovered, would be nothing short of unbelievable. The pack of bears continued to circle the truck, their movements strangely coordinated. But Emily remained still. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, her mind racing as she wondered what had brought them here. The tension in the air was palpable, but what happened next caught her completely off guard. One of the smaller bears, a cub no older than a year, broke away from the group and approached Emily's truck. Its small, frail body was marked with scratches, its fur matted with dirt, and its movements were stiff, as if every step caused it pain. Emily's heart skipped a beat. She could see immediately that something was terribly wrong. The cub's eyes were clouded with fear, and its body trembled as it inched closer to the truck. The other bears remained at a distance, seemingly watching with concern, but it was the cub's plight that brought a deep ache to Emily's chest. Without thinking, she threw open the door, the cold air rushing in as she stepped out cautiously. Her instincts kicked in. She couldn't just sit back and watch a helpless creature suffer. The bears around her watched silently, their attention focused on the cub and the woman who had dared to approach. As Emily knelt down in front of the cub, it took a tentative step forward, its nose twitching as it sniffed the air. Emily's voice was soft, calming, as she spoke to the frightened animal. "It's okay," she whispered. "I'm here to help you." With careful hands, Emily reached out, gently lifting the cub into her arms. It was surprisingly light, its small frame fragile and delicate. As she cradled it, she could feel its heart beating fast, fear and pain radiating from the tiny body. The urgency of the situation was clear. This cub needed help, and fast. She turned toward the truck, her mind already racing with plans. "I need to get you to safety," she murmured. As if understanding, the cub let out a small, pitiful sound, nuzzling closer to her chest, seeking comfort. The bond between them was instant. Emily's heart swelled with a protective instinct as she carefully laid the cub down on the seat beside her and started the engine. The pack of bears, which had once surrounded the truck with quiet intensity, now stepped back, giving her space to leave. Emily didn't look back. She was fully committed now, her focus solely on getting the cub to safety, knowing that every moment mattered. As the truck drove away, the cub remained nestled in her arms, its trembling subsiding. And for the first time since their encounter, Emily allowed herself to exhale. The urgency of the rescue had been met with a quiet bond of trust, a bond that, in that moment, promised to change both their lives forever. The drive to the Wildlife Rescue Center felt like an eternity. Emily's mind raced, her thoughts swirling between worry for the cub's condition and the strange turn of events that had led her here. She glanced at the small creature curled up beside her, its fragile body shivering slightly despite the warmth of the truck. The cub had stopped trembling since she had wrapped it in a soft blanket, but its wide, uncertain eyes remained fixed on her. At the rescue center, Emily quickly carried the cub inside, where the staff rushed to help. They assessed the cub's injuries: deep scratches on its paws, signs of dehydration, and a possible broken limb. It was clear that the cub had been on its own for far too long. They immediately set to work on stabilizing it, offering fluids, pain relief, and gentle care. But Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. The cub was physically safe, but emotionally, it was still far from calm. As days passed, the cub remained skittish, its trust hard to earn. Emily spent hours sitting quietly beside its enclosure, speaking to it softly, allowing it to adjust at its own pace. Yet, despite her efforts, the cub still flinched at her touch, its eyes always watching her with a mixture of fear and uncertainty. It wasn't until a particularly quiet evening that something unexpected happened. Emily had been spending time with the cub, offering a small bowl of food, when the facility's resident dog, Max, wandered in. Max was a large, gentle golden retriever, a longtime companion to the staff, who had grown used to the presence of all kinds of animals. He had a calming effect on everyone around him, always patient, always gentle. Today, however, he seemed especially drawn to the cub's enclosure. At first, the cub recoiled at Max's presence, huddling in the farthest corner, eyes wide with both curiosity and fear. Max, sensing the cub's hesitation, sat at a distance, wagging his tail gently. He tilted his head, watching the cub with soft, understanding eyes. Emily, noticing the quiet exchange, smiled and stepped back, allowing the two animals their space. The cub's eyes never left Max as the dog stayed put, unwavering, giving the young bear time to adjust. Slowly, ever so slowly, the cub's tension began to ease. After what felt like an eternity, the cub took a hesitant step forward, its body still stiff but not as rigid as before. Max, sensing this, lowered his body even further, as if inviting the cub to approach. The cub paused, then took another cautious step. Emily held her breath, watching the scene unfold in quiet wonder. It was Max's patience that made the difference. He didn't press the cub to engage. He simply waited, offering silent companionship. The cub, after a few moments, moved closer, sniffing the air cautiously. Then, with a soft, almost tentative motion, it touched Max's nose with a tiny paw. Max responded by giving a gentle, reassuring nudge with his head, his eyes soft and kind. The cub, its fear melting away under Max's calming presence, nuzzled into his fur. Emily's heart swelled as she watched the connection form. This was the moment the cub had been waiting for, the feeling of safety, of trust, of being cared for by another. From that moment on, the cub began to show signs of attachment. Max became its constant companion, sitting beside the cub during meals, napping in the enclosure together, and offering a sense of security the young bear had never known. The cub still had moments of hesitation, but Max was always there, offering comfort when the world seemed too overwhelming. As the days passed, Emily noticed a marked change. The cub, once withdrawn and wary, began to approach her with a newfound trust, often with Max by its side. The bond between the two animals had become undeniable. Max had shown the cub what it meant to feel safe, loved, and protected, and in return, the cub had brought an unexpected sense of joy to the gentle dog. They were a perfect pair, each healing the other in their own way. And so, in the quiet moments when the cub lay beside Max, the two of them nuzzled close, their bond growing stronger with each passing day. Emily knew that she had witnessed something extraordinary, a bond that had formed not through force, but through patience, understanding, and love. The cub's life had been forever changed by the kindness of a companion who had no words to offer, only silent support and a heart full of affection. As the days turned into weeks, Emily watched in awe as the cub's transformation began to unfold before her eyes. The little bear, once so fragile and withdrawn, was slowly blossoming into a more confident, playful creature. But it wasn't just the medical care that had helped heal the cub. It was the quiet companionship of Max, the golden retriever, who had become the cub's constant companion. At first, the cub had been reluctant to engage in any form of play. Its life in the wild had been harsh, and its trust had to be earned. But Max had a way of showing affection that required no words. He would nudge the cub with his nose, playfully wagging his tail, waiting patiently for the cub to make the first move. And eventually one day the cub did. It started with a small paw reaching out to bat gently at Max's tail, unsure at first, but filled with curiosity. Max responded with a low, happy whine, turning around to face the cub with eyes full of warmth. What followed was an unexpected moment of joy, a playful tussle between the two, with Max rolling onto his back and the cub carefully climbing on top of him. The cub's small claws dug lightly into Max's fur as it bounced around, clearly delighting in the new experience of play. It was a delicate moment, one that marked the first time the cub had truly let go of its past fears and allowed itself to enjoy life. From that day on, their bond deepened further. The cub began to mirror Max's actions, following the dog around the enclosure and even trying to fetch sticks, although it was more clumsy than Max. Still, the cub's efforts were endearing, and Max stood by it every step of the way. Emily could hardly believe how quickly the bond had formed between them. Max had unknowingly become the cub's teacher, and the cub, in turn, had become a joyful student. The cub learned more than just play. As it grew stronger, it began to observe Max's calm demeanor. If Max was ever startled by a sudden noise, the cub would pause, watching his reaction. If Max remained relaxed, the cub did too, understanding that there was no need to fear the unknown. In turn, Max took on a nurturing role, often laying beside the cub during nap time, providing warmth and comfort. He would rest his head on the cub's back, and the two would drift off together, the cub nestled close to Max, as though it had found its home. There were moments when Emily would find them side by side, the cub resting its head on Max's side while the dog licked the bear's ears in a gentle, motherly fashion. It was a simple act of care, but it meant the world to the cub, who was learning to trust not only humans, but also other animals. Max had become its surrogate parent, a figure of security, showing the cub how to navigate a world that had once been frightening. But it wasn't just in moments of play or rest that their bond grew stronger. There were also moments of mutual care, small gestures that spoke volumes about the depth of their connection. When the cub began to eat solid food, Max would always wait nearby, watching over the cub protectively as it took small bites. Emily often noticed the cub looking up at Max between mouthfuls, as if seeking reassurance. And Max, always steady, would give a soft woof, as if to say, "You're doing great." The cub would continue eating, comforted by the dog's silent presence. On particularly cold nights, the cub would snuggle against Max for warmth, pressing its small body into the dog's fur, while Max, ever the protector, would curl around the cub like a shield. The two of them, a wild creature and a domesticated dog, had become inseparable, and Emily could see that the cub had not only healed physically, but emotionally as well. It had learned that it wasn't alone, that there was love and comfort to be found in the most unexpected places. The cub's once wary eyes had softened, and though it was still a wild animal at heart, it had learned to seek out companionship and affection. Max had become more than just a playmate. He had become a constant, a presence the cub could rely on. The cub now followed Max around with a sense of purpose, always staying close, as though its life had found balance between its instincts and the safety offered by the golden retriever. Their friendship was a testament to the power of patience and kindness, and Emily couldn't help but feel that the cub had learned something that was crucial for its survival: the ability to trust, to seek help, and to open itself up to love. Max had shown it that the world wasn't as dangerous as it once seemed, and the cub had shown Max the joy of unconditional companionship. Together, they had become a team, two souls different in so many ways, yet united in their bond. As much as the bond between the cub and Max had blossomed, their journey was not without its hurdles. Though the cub had begun to heal both physically and emotionally, The wild instincts that ran deep in its veins were not so easily quelled. It was still a young bear, learning to adapt to a world that was far different from the wild forests it had once roamed. The first real challenge came when the cub's natural fear of humans resurfaced. Emily, who had grown so close to the cub through daily care, was suddenly met with resistance. The cub had always been skittish around her at times, but one morning, after a visit from the wildlife authorities, the cub became unusually nervous. The unfamiliar scents, the strange voices, and the bustle of new faces seemed to overwhelm it. It recoiled from Emily's touch, huddling in the farthest corner of its enclosure, its eyes wide with panic. Max, sensing the cub's distress, immediately moved closer, his large body offering a shield between the cub and the outside world. The dog's calm presence seemed to soothe the cub's anxiety. Max sat quietly by the cub's side, his head turned toward Emily, as if silently telling the bear that everything was okay. Slowly, the cub began to relax, its breathing evening out. It wasn't long before the cub leaned in, touching Max's fur with its nose, seeking comfort from the only familiar presence it had. It was moments like these, when the cub's fear took over, that Emily saw how much Max's role had become more than just that of a companion. Max had become a protector, offering a sense of security when the world outside felt too overwhelming. Emily knew that without Max, the cub would have had a much harder time adjusting. She, too, had learned that patience was key. Instead of pushing the cub to trust her, she allowed the cub to approach on its own terms, slowly regaining its sense of safety with both her and Max by its side. As the cub grew stronger, a new challenge emerged: the need for independence. While the cub had always been drawn to Max, it was beginning to assert its own space more. There were moments when the cub would wander off, exploring the enclosure alone, testing its own strength and instincts. But as it did, Max would follow at a distance, not out of necessity, but out of care. One afternoon, Emily watched as the cub ventured too close to the edge of the woods near the center, an area the staff had warned was not safe. The cub, now taller and more confident, seemed to forget the boundaries of the enclosure. Max, however, noticed the cub's movement and, without hesitation, trotted after it. Emily's heart skipped a beat as she watched Max position himself between the cub and the trees, blocking its path with a firm, protective stance. The cub hesitated for a moment, its instincts pulling it toward the woods. But when it looked at Max, there was no fear, just understanding. The cub turned back, obediently following Max's lead, as if it knew the dog was looking out for its best interests. Emily rushed over, grateful for Max's quiet wisdom. Together, the pair had navigated a potentially dangerous situation, showing the cub that sometimes safety meant not following its wild urges. It was moments like this, when the two animals worked together seamlessly, that Emily saw how deep their bond had truly become. Max was not just a friend or playmate. He was the cub's anchor, the calm to its storm. And the cub, for all its wild nature, had come to rely on Max as its guide. Another challenge came when the cub started to show signs of aggression, something not unusual for a young bear trying to establish its dominance. There were times when the cub would growl at Max, testing his limits. But Max, with his patient demeanor, never retaliated. Instead, he would back away slightly, giving the cub space to vent. It was through this non-confrontational approach that the cub learned not only respect, but also the importance of patience. And so, through each challenge, they grew stronger together. Max showed the cub how to navigate the world, not just through play, but also through understanding and protection. The cub, in turn, taught Max the value of gentle boundaries and trust, a reminder that sometimes the best way to move forward was to take a step back and wait. Through the challenges they faced, fear, boundaries, and moments of uncertainty, the bond between Max and the cub only deepened. They had become a true team, each offering something the other needed. Max, the protector and teacher, and the cub, the wild creature learning to trust, were learning from each other every day. Together, they proved that love and patience could overcome even the deepest fears and the toughest obstacles. The day came when Emily realized just how fragile the balance was between the cub and the wild world it had once belonged to. The cub, now large enough to wander farther from the safety of the enclosure, was becoming more restless. Emily had always known that there would come a time when the wild instincts inside the cub would stir, a time when the lure of the wilderness would grow too strong to ignore. What she didn't anticipate was how much she would need to rely on Max when that time came. It happened early one morning. Emily had been tending to the animals in the main barn when a loud crash echoed from the direction of the cub's enclosure. Her heart sank as she rushed outside, panic rising. The cub had managed to break through a gap in the fencing, something that had never happened before. It stood just outside the enclosure, looking both nervous and determined, as if drawn by some invisible force toward the woods beyond. Emily called out, but the cub hesitated, its large brown eyes flicking from her to the forest beyond, as though torn between two worlds. Max, sensing the urgency of the situation, padded over to the cub, his body low and calm. He stood between the cub and the opening, his body language clear. This wasn't the time for a challenge, but for protection. The cub, startled by Max's position, let out a low growl, unsure of its next move. Emily, her voice trembling, stepped closer. "It's okay," she called softly. "Come back. Max is here. You're safe." But the cub wasn't sure anymore. The pull of the wild was too strong, and the cub stepped forward, its claws scraping against the ground, ready to break free into the unknown. Emily's heart pounded. She knew she couldn't force the cub back. It was too powerful, too unpredictable now. The bond they had built over the months was being tested in that moment, as the cub's instincts began to take over. Max, ever the protector, stepped forward and blocked the cub's path. He didn't growl or bark. He simply stood there, his presence a quiet reassurance. The cub looked at him for a moment, its chest heaving with uncertainty. Then, slowly, the cub turned away from the woods, lowering its head. It was a subtle act, but it spoke volumes. The wild had called, but Max had answered with something stronger: love and loyalty. Emily held her breath as the cub hesitated, its wildness still there, but tempered by Max's steady presence. Then, with a soft grunt, the cub took a few steps back and sat down, its head resting against Max's side. The tension between them dissipated. Max nudged the cub gently with his nose, and Emily knelt down beside them, feeling the weight of the moment. This was the turning point, the moment when the cub chose trust over instinct. It was a delicate decision, one that would shape the future of their bond. And in that moment, Emily knew that the cub had truly learned something important, that the wild world was not the only world it needed to survive in. The love and protection it had found with Max were more powerful than any pull from the forest beyond. As Max and the cub sat side by side, Emily couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude. She had watched them grow together, overcome obstacles, and face fears. And now, they had come through the greatest test of all, together. Max, with his quiet strength, had shown the cub that sometimes the greatest bravery lies in holding back and letting love guide the way. As the seasons changed, so did the bond between Max and the cub. What had begun as an unlikely partnership, born out of necessity and survival, had evolved into something far deeper, an unspoken connection that neither time nor distance could diminish. Max, once a protective figure in the cub's life, had become its unwavering companion. The cub, once a fearful and uncertain creature, had grown stronger and more confident under Max's guidance. With each passing day, the two animals continued to teach one another valuable lessons. The cub, now thriving, had shed much of the uncertainty that had plagued its early days in captivity. It had learned the ways of the world from Max, following the dog's lead with an eagerness that spoke to a bond forged in trust and shared experience. And Max, too, had found new purpose in his role as protector, companion, and friend. He had learned to understand the cub in ways that no one else could, recognizing its subtle cues and offering reassurance when needed. Emily watched the pair with a heart full of pride. She had seen the cub grow from a scared, injured creature into a confident and beautiful bear. And she had seen Max, with his patient heart and steadfast loyalty, guide the cub every step of the way. Together, they had weathered storms, faced fears, and overcome the greatest challenges. Their bond had only grown stronger, as deep and unwavering as the love that had brought them together in the first place. One evening, as Emily sat outside with the two of them, watching the sun set behind the mountains, she reflected on the incredible journey they had all shared. The wild world had tried to pull the cub away, but it had stayed, not because it had to, but because it had found something far more powerful, a sense of home, of belonging, and of love. As the cub leaned against Max, the dog's head resting on the cub's shoulder, Emily smiled softly. The world may be vast and unpredictable, but in that quiet moment, surrounded by the peaceful sounds of nature, it was clear that love had created a bond that no force could break. Max and the cub had found in each other something greater than survival, a family. In the end, it was love that saved them all, not just the cub but Max and Emily too. And as they sat together, the warmth of their friendship radiated, a reminder that even in the wildest of circumstances, kindness, compassion, and protection could create a bond that lasted a lifetime.